morning once again, colleagues. And my apologies for arriving late. I had a really urgent commitment to attend to at the last minute. So my apologies. Let me get right into it. I had about 4 questions to guide me in this presentation. And what I liked about my questions, they said, in your opinion. So my view is that I'm going to present. It's not the department's views. So let me get right into it. The first question was, this thing is not very visible, but is part of the SSP framework mandate to include sector performance data, that is, in brackets, SETA evaluation data? And the simple answer to that is yes. And you have space for that in your research process and methods section to present all the data, all the reports that informed your SSP. So whilst the SSP framework is there to guide SETAs on requisite information to be presented, the requirement and expectation is that this information that you are presenting is based on some evaluation or research that was conducted. This can include results from tracer studies, results from reports from reviews of previous year's planning documents, your SETA annual report, the previous year's SETA annual reports, and all the other studies that informed the SSP. So year on year, SETA spend on learning interventions, and these include learnerships, internships, apprenticeships, and so forth. So SETAs are expected to conduct evaluation of SETA interventions through tracer studies, so as to know whether these are effective, there's efficiency, and whether these are relevant for the labor market. So that is the expectation from the department. The reports or results from such studies should fit into the SSP process and inform the SETA priorities that would ensure effectiveness and impact, so that SETAs don't train people that will end up in the streets and are not employable. So that is my response to the first question. The second one was, is there adequate use of evaluation data in the SSP? And in that question, I struggled with the word adequate. What do you mean? How do you define adequacy? But then I just took it to mean sufficiently. So whilst my response to that was, while SETAs that have conducted some evaluation through tracer studies have used the data to inform the SSP, I would not say that it is at a level where I can say it is satisfactory or adequate. Because you would note that many SETAs conduct tracer studies or would indicate that they have conducted tracer studies or evaluation studies. But when it comes to the content of the SSP, in the relevant chapters, you don't see that data coming through or that data presented in the relevant chapters of the SSP, which is something that we're working on continuously with the colleagues. And most SETAs rely on WSP data and secondary data sources in the main to inform the content of the SSP, owing to lack of research and M&E capacity at a SETA. The warm bodies, I think you alluded to that briefly. For many SETAs, the M&E function is not perceived as key to informing the sector skills planning process. And even those that have conducted some evaluation or impact studies, this has been viewed as a once-off event. It's not something that is built within the organization to say it is the core function that needs to be there and that has to be capacitated with relevant expertise, relevant equipments, and so forth. So that is something that as a department we're working on and will guide accordingly. The next question was, do you foresee any structural challenges to the integration or contribution of evaluation into the SSP process? I took that to mean the challenges currently, to say what are the challenges that are hindering the integration of evaluation into the SSP process. Lack of in-house capacity at SETAs to undertake M&E and research is a challenge. Most SETAs commission parts of this function. And you would find that there is one person at a SETA who is responsible for research and SSP. That very same person is responsible for M&E functions of the SETA. So that is something that is a challenge across many of the SETAs. Lack of recognition of the role of M&E in sector skills planning and how these two functions are interlinked is also another challenge. We need a mind shift. We need to be at a point where we understand that M&E reports should inform our planning. Disintegration between planning and reporting and silo approach to planning and reporting. I think you alluded to that as well in your presentation. And that is something that, from the reviewer's perspective, we've also picked up. And I must indicate that there is work at the department as well to ensure that, as a department, we demonstrate the modus operandi from the department's side, from integration between the colleagues that are responsible for monitoring and evaluation of SETA performance, and the colleagues that are responsible for supporting sector skills planning and SETAs. We're working on that at the present moment. My next question was, how can the M&E function be better integrated into the SSP process? My response, again, my view, capacitate the M&E and research unit with not only systems, but also human resources, warm bodies, people that have know-how of how to develop the M&E tools. What are the methodologies that have to be employed to arrive at the reports that we need? Because the practice out there is that that researcher would be responsible for M&E. They are responsible for ensuring that quarterly reports are submitted, and that one person is also responsible for putting together the sector skills plan. So that is not how we should be working. Operationally at SETAs, the M&E unit needs to work hand in hand with the sector skills planning and research unit, or be integrated into the planning unit. He mentioned that at his SETA, that is how it works. And again, we learn through as we go. We learn as we go with these processes, because it's one thing that we had pointed out as a gap in our processes. But then we tried through our cluster sessions to have SETAs share their best practices so that they can learn from each other. The department needs to lead from the front in demonstrating this integration, how it should work. We need to be saying this is how it should be structured such that it works. Good planning should be informed by not only research, but also credible monitoring and evaluation data. And this in turn can play a major role in ensuring evidence-based planning at SETAs. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was my presentation, my views.
Now you know why she doesn't need. And it's just a pity that you were not here. Your presentation and Ms. Sibongile's presentation were actually identical. So the discussion should be very interesting. I think as we go into a final presentation, Kamal's his job was to provide an outsider's perspective. Just like Dr. Popiwa set the tone in terms of her experience with working with SETAs, but also suggesting what a typical evaluation or M&E framework for SETAs would actually look like. Kamal, now your stage.
So, this one. This one. Okay. So, thank you for inviting me and for the really interesting inputs. And I have to say, I feel like I should summarize by going, okay, everything's been said. Because there's nothing people have said that I was saying to Spingalila, we can make it provocative. But actually, there's nothing people have said that I totally disagree with. I was expecting more of that. There was nothing defensive about it. People are saying, okay, this is what we need to be doing, and these are some of the challenges. So I'm going to kind of skim through my slides, because I don't feel I've got much new to add, but in a sense, what I have tried to do is to say, okay, what would it look like if you were looking at it as a framework? And I also want to really just say thank you also to the first speaker, who I took a lot of notes with around why aren't people using evidence? Because I think that's quite a good grounding, because I did note in some of the presentations, there was, okay, we need to make it structurally clearer, the linkage, or we need to make it more compulsory. But I I get that, and I know we are by nature institutions that work in a kind of bureaucracy, and I mean that in the best possible use of the term. And so rules and formal meetings and agreements and compliance are important. But it feels to me it's never going to really properly happen unless we understand the logic of it and unless we grapple with why people are not using evidence properly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is it because our evaluations aren't good enough? Or is it, what's the obstacle to really using the evaluations? And so I thought it was such a useful starting point to say structural issues are one thing, but we also need to look at the other reasons people are not just in this world, but generally, are not using evidence that we produce as well as they should, and how we grapple with it. So I think it was really helpful. So that's my long preamble, which I've given myself because I'm going to be really short on the slides. Because I think, and people have spoken about this, the brief was around sector skills planning, and that's obviously only one function of CETAs, but increasingly the core function. I'd like to think that in the processes that we've agreed on in the last few years, there's been a simplification of CETA roles. And so driving relevant quality provision is core to what CETAs are doing. And so the SSP is a critical tool in that regard. And in trying to think through a framework, I took the liberty of trying to understand if we were speaking program theory language, which is the language I feel more comfortable with, what is the logic of this SSP in our system? So we're meant to understand demand in quite a nuanced way, hopefully. We meant to translate that demand to supply. That's the key role of a CETA. Okay, we've got that, that's the demand. What does that mean? And supply isn't just about what programs, it's about how we fund it, how we incentivize different people to behave in a particular way, whether that's employers, it's providers. That's what we do with that demand information. We signal that. And then we implement the interventions we agreed upon. And hopefully, we meet the demand. Right? I mean, that's the logic. And because we have done that, because we've met demand, that results in a whole lot of changes for the individual, which is what our tracer studies focus on, for the institution, whether that's a company or a local government or a school or a district, and of course for the sector and the economy as a whole. So we've met demand correctly, so therefore those changes can happen. And that might be inclusive growth and transformation, or it could be improved service delivery, or improved quality of education. So that's the logic of what we're doing. So when we say we're using evaluation in our SSP, our whole SSP should be part of that process. And so part of the difficulty for me is not just whether we have combined meetings, but do we conceptualize it as one thing? Are we thinking about, okay, that's our theory of change. When we do any particular evaluation, what is it we're trying to find out in relation to whether we're doing this? So that's what I've focused on. And so we have to know, for example, are we succeeding in meeting demand? So we've got one indicator which people have spoken about, which is, are the learners progressing in the way we anticipated? Are they getting jobs? Are they getting promotions? Are they able to take on new machinery? What's happening? That's one indicator of whether we're meeting demand. So although we're using tracer studies often for other reasons, in fact it's an indicator of whether we got demand right. If at the end of all of our programs, young people who are unemployed are still unemployed, did we get demand right? Maybe we got demand right because there was a need for electricians, but maybe we got the wrong kinds of electricians. Or maybe we misunderstood, and in fact there are electricians, and the reason the demand isn't met is because the working conditions are horrible. In which case, our training program's not going to do anything. So did we get, if we're not getting employment, if people are not progressing, did we get the demand right? That's the question we have to be asking. We need to find out from companies, and that's another indicator. When they used to say they had skill shortages, is that reducing? That's another indicator of whether we got demand right. If employers tell us, year on year, that we still have a huge skills crisis, we have a shortage and we can't do what we need to do because of that, we're not meeting demand. Again, we need to understand why. Is that because we misunderstood demand? Is it because the quality of our programs are perceived to be of a poor quality, and so employers don't recruit our graduates anyway? What's the reason? So in each instance, we're going back to the demand we articulated, understanding whether we met it, and if we did, Where else are things going wrong? Because it does mean that something's gone wrong. And then, of course, other role players. Have these changes contributed to growth in the industry, and so on and so on. So, as part of our so that's why when I say the evaluation is part of, it's not separate. It's constantly evaluating our theory of change for our sector skills plan and making us ask questions about how we've articulated either the demand or how we've translated that demand into supply. So this I've spoken to already, but what are the different reasons? We have to understand if we didn't meet demand, why not? Is it a demand issue? We didn't articulate it, we didn't translate it. So we said a big demand is what? ECD. We said a big demand is ECD. We didn't look at the fact that the demand is in one province, not another. So we got that wrong. And we also didn't look at the fact that the universities or the providers were at capacity. And so if we wanted them to expand enrollment, they actually needed funding to increase their classroom sizes. So we didn't think through it. So we said, yay, more programs. But we didn't think through the different elements of what that took. I'm not saying that's the case with ECD, but that's what we mean, Robin. We have to say what are supply side interventions. Because maybe we just said we'll give discretionary grants for learnerships. But we didn't look at the fact that the system has no more capacity to absorb more learners, even if people are asking for it. So did we do that correctly? Did we implement it correctly? Maybe we did everything right at the CETA level, but the quality was so bad it didn't help. Or maybe there were other factors. Maybe actually the whole economy changed while we were doing it. And so we need to go right back to the drawing board and check our assumptions. So it's about doing that. And then, and this was very much, I think, what you flagged directly in your presentation, so I won't go through it. We'd have to be asking, are we doing the right things in the right way? Right? In terms of when things are not happening as we intended. And that could be, as you mentioned, it could be qualifications, maybe learners are not applying. Why not? So it's working out at each instance, where's the crack? And that's what the evaluations do as part of that SSP. It's going back to each assumption in that SSP and saying, where is it not happening? Here and here, maybe it's perfect. Here is where it's falling. And then I've noted this, and I'm going to look at the clear people as I say this, because if I was standing here and I didn't say this, I'd be shot. Then cutting across that is the gender issues. So one of the things we did towards the end of last year was a meta-review of all CETA evaluations, of all programs. And one of the things that completely cut across them was the absence of gender as a factor. And the fact that in those programs that did address gender, how that significantly changed things. If it was thought about at the point of selection, enrollment, design, and so on. So again, that's a factor of demand, and are we doing things in the right way? So I'm just flagging that here, not as something that needs to cut across each of these questions when we're doing it. And then evaluation methods, and I won't go through this because people have spoken about this extensively. There are a number of different methods we then can use. And we need to be, and I think most of the speakers have mentioned that, and it's great to hear it also from DHET. But is the combination of how we're using routine data more effectively, and then how we're using evaluative studies. Evaluative studies should tell us what the routine data can't. It shouldn't be because, oh my God, that routine data is such a mess that we don't want to go near it. That is not really the reason we do evaluations. So, and then how do we be more systemic about the evaluations we do? And then when we do other evaluation studies, how do we make sure it's answering a particular question that we're struggling with? So if we're not having the impact we wanted to on demand, what's the particular thing we're trying to understand that the evaluation could help us answer? But beyond that, it should actually be systemic. We should be doing systemic monitoring through our routine data, systemic evaluation, which is constantly in an ongoing way. And we're only doing specific evaluation studies when we hit a problem. And then we are going to use it because it is answering something we're trying to solve. Not answering a DHET or DPME have said we must have a certain amount of evaluations based on the quantity and the quality of the contract, or which means it's just done. So how do we ensure the results of the evaluations feed into future SSPs? So there have already been a number of suggestions made there. And for me, it is about the one thing I keep saying, which is making it part of. And it's not just structural. It's not just saying, Sibongile's got permission to come to our meetings. Did you have a point? And then moving on. It's not that. It's understanding that if we're designing an SSP, it's the same as designing any other type of intervention. We have to think through the program theory and understand evaluation as part of that. And then the timing of the evaluations must be linked to that. Because also that's often the problem. Many, many times we get asked to do an evaluation just after the strategic planning session's already happened. Doesn't kind of make sense. So we do need to be thinking about timing and how they align. And critically, that there's a structured learning process. And if I was DHET for a day, then I would be saying, chaps, if you've done an evaluation and you filed it, you haven't done an evaluation. It's not an evaluation till the relevant people who are engaging in that topic have sat down and reflected on the findings and thought through the implications for the SSP and the other elements of the program. Otherwise, somebody else has done an evaluation, and well done to them. But you haven't translated it into a learning experience, which means you haven't done it. So for me, that's a key part of what this process has to be about. So there must be structured learning, and it must be built in. And then critically, it must be that there's space for different role players to reflect on the findings. So in the beginning, as we start, I'm going to kind of end where we started, which is kind of you have an evaluation and it's like hot, and then it gets hidden because it's too awkward. But actually, we need to be able to say honestly, here's the evaluation. Staff will process it as CETA staff, because CETA management must, because evaluators can get things wrong. You must correct things that are wrong. You must also respond. This is true. This is an issue, and this is how we thought about it. But then we need to look at ways we're sharing it with our role players, so that we're bringing our partners on board and saying, this is what we're struggling with. What are the views? And for me, that's also a key part of what a framework needs to look at. So the learning is partly internal and partly bringing on board our partners to reflect on that. And I think that's it.
Thank you very much, Kamala. I think that's a very good note to end the presentations on. What we're going to do now is that, I'm sure, because I've seen people taking notes, I have questions of my own as well. I'm going to take a round of questions for the panel, or anyone that's in the room that would like to actually address any of the questions. So if you have any questions, this will be the right time to actually air them. Before I do that, actually, I wanted to just hand these out to my 4 guest panelists. Since Dr. Pepua will be getting his salary tomorrow, he's not getting it. That's enough for him. Thank you very much. Come on. This is just a token of our appreciation and a way of getting you to always remember the center. And there's a friend out there. Right. So we've had all our presentations. We've had